Greetings, travelers. I'm your host, the C. That knows a lot, Dr. Waluigi. Whenever I hear people talk about some of the best comic book movies made by Marvel, chances are you'll hear the big three franchises of the late 90s to the early 2000s. Movies like Blade, Spider-Man, and X-Men, which arguably still hold up, even with some of the more dated effects. But with that said, I do feel one of the other Marvel movies that did come out around the same time is just as good. I don't think that it's the best adaptation of this character, as the newer Netflix and Disney Plus series did improve from what this movie set up, but I do still think that there's just as much good in this movie as what those series have given us. Which, if you haven't guessed by now, we will be taking a look at the 2003 adaptation of Daredevil. Created by Stan Lee and Bill Everett, Daredevil was one of the unique characters created by Marvel at the time, a character who had a disability that gave him superpowers. Which, okay, we had something like that with X-Men, but this character had Frank Miller work on one of his best stories. Okay, in all honesty, Daredevil wasn't that original of a concept, nor was he the most unique superhero even back then, but there have been other interpretations of the character that have made him more interesting. I don't think that this movie is the definitive adaptation, but there are elements to it that I think work and make it just as enjoyable as the show. Plus, it has the first proper version of Daredevil after his cameo in the Bill Bixby Hulk movie. Anyway, the movie began development in 1997, 1 year before Blade was released. Unfortunately, this is another case of a movie developing problems throughout the course of filming. While this movie was originally planned to be distributed by 20th Century Fox, the movie was sent through development hell because of the bankruptcy of Marvel, where the movie was passed around to different companies until it was eventually picked up by New Regency and would be redistributed by 20th Century Fox. The movie was a commercial success, making $179 million against a $78 million budget. However, the critical reception was a different story, as many critics disliked the film for being another generic superhero movie that had been common at the time. Even today, most critics find the movie boring and generic, especially since the release of the MCU. I, on the other hand, feel that the movie isn't as bad as other more popular Marvel movies, though it does have its own problems that hold it back from being just as good as other early Marvel movies. But that's what happens to movies that are over 10 years old. The movie follows the origins of lawyer Matt Murdock, aka Daredevil, as he is blinded by toxic chemicals. But the chemicals do enhance his other senses that make him able to see just as well as someone who has regular sight. However, he learns that his father is killed by a powerful crime lord known as the Kingpin, and makes it his life's goal to stop him. Can Matt stop the Kingpin and his goal to control all of New York? Or will he be taken down by the Kingpin's newest assassin, Bullseye? I'd argue that this is one of the better casts for a superhero movie. Keep in mind that for a while, superhero movies made some really bad casting choices, like having a basketball player play an underdeveloped Superman ripoff. So trust me when I say they could have made much worse decisions. I do like Ben Affleck, as he does have the charm and charisma when he plays Matt, but he is a little silly when he dons his costume. The villains are also very good and faithful to the comics in this movie, which is thanks to them being played by some of the best actors at the time. Kingpin being played by the late Michael Clarke Duncan, and the goofy but entertaining Bullseye played by the newest version of the Penguin, Colin Farrell. They both bring the movie up and are the reason I think most fans rewatch this movie, unlike certain other characters that I shall discuss in a later section of the review. But for now, let's head over to the positives. While I do think that the Netflix adaptation is much better by comparison, there are at least 3 reasons why I like this movie. One is the costume. I know it may seem strange to compliment it since I did say it looked goofy, but keep in mind that while Daredevil did have some animated appearances in the past, the only live-action appearance he made was as a side character in the second TV movie of the 70s Hulk TV series. And let's just say that that costume was something to be desired. So while the costume isn't as good as the one worn by Charlie Cox, it is at least better compared to that version. The second is the fight choreography. While many of the early Marvel movies are considerably dated, the one thing that does still hold up with these movies is the fight choreography. From Blade to X-Men, all of the movies have fast-paced and fun fights that I think are a good reason to check out these movies. The final reason I like this movie is because of how well represented it is to the comics. Again, I'm aware that the Netflix series is better in comparison to this movie, but considering that this movie came out at a time when comic book movies weren't being respected either because the writers didn't care about the source material or because they didn't know what or which comics to adapt. So to have a movie that takes enough of the source material and actually treat it with some respect was something very rare even back then. But for everything this film does right, there are always certain things that make this film dated. Oh, I've been holding this back until now, so let's talk about this movie's worst character, Elektra, played by Jennifer Gardner. I know many people may not have a problem with this decision, considering the creators may have chosen her because Jennifer and Ben were dating at the time and had been in several movies together. But this was her first comic book movie, and she plays a character that in the comics was the daughter of a Greek ambassador who ended up becoming a badass assassin, and even becoming Daredevil herself for a time. In my opinion, I don't see her as this character because her performance is very stiff and comes off as if she's bored, which doesn't help that most of her filmography consists of rom-com films. I do give her credit that she at least has some good fight scenes, and she did give it her all to train for the movie, but her regular performance for the rest of the movie kills this character for me. The only other thing that doesn't work for this movie is that the CG in this movie is very dated. Don't get me wrong, it's better than Blade's or Spider-Man's use of CG, but it's still very dated compared to movies made today. However, on the plus side, there was very little use of CG in this movie, but it is still very dated and looks a little too rubbery and has moments where Daredevil's weapons look like spaghetti. When it comes to a lot of the comic book movies that came out before the MCU, a lot of them show the mentality of how studios viewed comic books at the time, as these silly kids movies that couldn't be taken seriously and were just made to sell toys. While some of them still exist, it's nice to see that there were some people that did take them seriously. I do think that this isn't the best interpretation of this character and his universe, but I do think that the writing, most of the cast, and the action still hold up, and I think some people will enjoy it even with the silly and outdated moments. Overall, I give Daredevil a 7 out of 10. While not the best of the early 2000s comic book movies, it's still a good movie that I think gets overlooked because it came out in between Blade 2 and Spider-Man 2. So it does make some sense, I guess. Thanks for watching, I'm Dr. Waluigi. And remember, don't judge a book by its cover, cause you'll never know what's inside. Good night, everyone.